Devastated woman sits alone in the pouring rain after being left at the altar when a passing CEO stops his car, looks into her eyes and says, "Come with me." But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The rain poured relentlessly, drenching Emma's pristine white gown as she sat on the church steps. Makeup streaked down her face, black rivulets of mascara mixing with tears and raindrops. The carefully arranged flowers in her hair had come loose, hanging limply around her shoulders. 2 hours had passed since James was supposed to say, "I do." 2 hours since her world had shattered into a million pieces. The guests had long since dispersed, offering awkward condolences and pitying glances. Her parents had tried to convince her to come home, but Emma couldn't bear the thought of returning to the apartment she'd shared with James, filled with photographs and memories of the life they'd planned together. So instead, she sat in the rain, letting the cold seep into her bones, hoping it would numb the pain in her heart. She clutched her phone, rereading the text message that had destroyed everything. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." 7 words. 7 simple words that had torn apart 5 years of love and trust. No explanation, no goodbye in person. Just 7 cold, impersonal words on a screen. The church doors opened behind her, and Emma didn't bother turning around. It was probably the pastor, coming to tell her they needed to lock up the building. "Emma, sweetheart, you can't stay out here all night." Her maid of honor Sarah's voice was gentle, concerned. "You're going to catch pneumonia. Please, come home with me. We'll figure this out together." Emma shook her head, water spraying from her soaked hair. "I just need a little more time," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drumming of rain on the pavement. "Please, Sarah, just a little more time alone." Sarah hesitated, then sighed. 30 minutes. Then I'm coming back, and I'm dragging you home if I have to." She draped her coat over Emma's shoulders before retreating back into the church. Emma stared at the rain-slicked streets, watching the headlights of passing cars illuminate the darkness momentarily before disappearing around corners. Each car represented someone with somewhere to go, someone with purpose. Meanwhile, she felt adrift, untethered from the future she'd planned so meticulously. She and James had met in college, both studying business. He'd been charming, ambitious, with boyish good looks and a contagious laugh. They'd built their relationship slowly, carefully, making plans for their future together. A house in the suburbs, 2 children, maybe a dog. A life that now existed only in her imagination. The rain began to fall harder, but Emma hardly noticed. She was lost in memories, wondering where it had all gone wrong. Had he met someone else? Had he simply gotten cold feet? Or had he never loved her at all? A black sedan slowed as it approached the church, its wipers working furiously against the downpour. Through the blur of rain, Emma could make out the silhouette of a driver, but she quickly looked away. She didn't want anyone else to see her like this, broken and abandoned. The car came to a stop directly in front of her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the back door opened and a man stepped out, shielding himself with an umbrella. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emma's entire wedding. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his face bore the sharp, defined features of someone accustomed to authority. "Are you all right?" His voice was deep, with a hint of concern that seemed genuine despite the formal tone. Emma let out a bitter laugh. "Do I look all right to you?" Instead of being offended by her sharp response, a small smile crossed his face. "Fair point. You look like you've been through hell." "Something like that," Emma muttered, wrapping Sarah's coat tighter around her shoulders. "Look, I appreciate the concern, but I'd really like to be alone right now." The man studied her for a moment, taking in her ruined wedding dress, her smeared makeup, and the defeated slump of her shoulders. "I understand wanting to be alone, but sitting in the rain won't solve whatever problem you're facing. Emma looked up at him, irritation flaring. "And what would you suggest? That I just move on and forget that the man I loved abandoned me at the altar? That I pretend my entire future hasn't just crumbled before my eyes?" Recognition dawned on the man's face. "Ah, left at the altar. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix anything," Emma said bitterly. "No, it doesn't," he agreed, surprising her. "Nothing can fix what happened today, but you can't sit here forever." Emma sighed, too exhausted to argue. "I know. My friend is coming back for me soon." The man glanced at his watch, then back at the rain-drenched woman before him. There was something in her eyes, beneath the pain and anger, a resilience that struck him. Against his better judgment, he made a decision. "I'm Alexander Reed," he said, extending his hand. "CEO of Reed Enterprises." Emma stared at his hand, then back up at his face, recognition flickering in her eyes. Reed Enterprises was one of the largest tech companies in the country. She'd read about Alexander Reed in business magazines, a self-made billionaire who'd built his empire from scratch. She didn't take his hand. "Emma Mitchell, abandoned bride." Alexander lowered his hand, unfazed by her rejection. "Emma, I'm going to make you an offer. You can say no, and I'll get back in my car and drive away. But before you decide, I want you to consider what waiting for your friend means. It means going back to your old life, facing everyone's pity, drowning in memories of the man who left you." Emma frowned, suspicion replacing some of the sadness in her eyes. "What kind of offer?" "Come with me," Alexander said simply. "I'm flying to my beach house in the Hamptons tonight. You can have the guest house to yourself. No questions, no expectations, just a place to escape, to breathe, to figure out your next move away from everyone who knows what happened today." Emma's eyes widened. "Are you insane? I don't know you. You could be a serial killer for all I know." Alexander smiled, pulling out his phone. "Look me up. Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Enterprises. You'll find plenty of articles, interviews, public appearances. Not exactly the profile of a serial killer." Emma hesitated, then pulled out her own phone. With shaking fingers, she typed his name into the search bar. Immediately, hundreds of results appeared. Business profiles, charity galas, tech conferences, the same face as the man standing before her. "Why would you offer something like this to a complete stranger?" Emma asked, unable to hide her bewilderment. Alexander's expression turned serious. 5 years ago, I went through something similar. Different circumstances, but the same feeling of having my life shattered overnight. Someone offered me an escape when I needed it most. I'm simply paying it forward." Emma bit her lip, considering. Every logical part of her brain was screaming that this was crazy, dangerous, completely irrational. But beneath that voice was a quieter one, whispering that she couldn't face the sympathetic looks, the awkward conversations, the empty apartment. Not yet. "My friend will be worried," she said finally, not quite a refusal. "You can call her on the way to the airport," Alexander replied. "Tell her you're safe, that you need some time away." Emma looked up at the church where she was supposed to have started her new life today, then back at Alexander, a stranger offering an escape from the wreckage of her plans. "No expectations?" she asked cautiously. "None," he confirmed. "The guest house is completely separate from the main house. You'll have your privacy. Stay a day, a week, however long you need to clear your head. When you're ready to face the world again, I'll arrange for your flight home." Emma took a deep breath. Perhaps it was the shock, or the emotional exhaustion, or simply the desperate need to be anywhere but here, but she found herself nodding slowly. "All right," she whispered. "I'll come with you." Alexander's expression remained neutral, but he extended his umbrella to cover her as she stood, her soaked wedding dress clinging to her body, making each movement difficult. "My driver will take us to my penthouse first," Alexander said as he guided her toward the car. "You can change into something dry before we head to the airport." As Emma slid into the back seat of the luxury sedan, she felt a strange sense of unreality wash over her. This morning she had been preparing to marry James, to begin the life they had planned together. Now she was in a billionaire's car, heading to his beach house, leaving behind everything familiar. The car pulled away from the curb, and Emma watched as the church disappeared from view. With it went the last remnants of the future she had imagined for herself. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also the possibility of something new, something unexpected. "You can still change your mind," Alexander said quietly, noticing her troubled expression. "I can turn the car around at any point." Emma shook her head, a strange determination settling over her despite the chaos of emotions still swirling within. "No, I need this. I need to go somewhere where nobody knows what happened today, where I don't have to explain or justify or accept condolences. I need to figure out who I am now that everything I planned has fallen apart." Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then that's what you'll do." As the car wound through the rain-slicked streets, Emma felt the first stirrings of something beyond the pain and humiliation, a faint, cautious curiosity about what might come next. She had no idea what awaited her at Alexander's beach house or what the coming days would bring, but for the first time since reading James's message, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not quite yet, but it was a step away from the abyss, and for now, that was enough. The ride to Alexander's penthouse was silent. Emma stared out the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. She'd called Sarah, who had predictably freaked out at the news that Emma was leaving town with a stranger. It had taken nearly 10 minutes of reassurance, and Alexander briefly taking the phone to introduce himself, before Sarah had reluctantly accepted the situation, making Emma promise to text her regularly and share her location. "Is this something you do often?" Emma finally broke the silence. "Rescue distraught women from church steps?" Alexander's lips twitched. "First time, actually." "So I'm special," Emma said, aiming for humor but hearing the brittle edge in her voice. "Everyone's special on the worst day of their life," Alexander replied, his gaze fixed on something beyond the rain-streaked window. "That's when you see who people really are." Emma examined him more carefully. In the confined space of the car, she noticed details she'd missed before. The subtle lines around his eyes, suggesting he was in his late 30s, the expensive watch on his wrist, the way he held himself, confident but not arrogant. There was something guarded about him, a wall she suspected few people ever saw beyond. "And who am I, according to your assessment?" she asked. Alexander turned to look at her directly. "Someone stronger than she realizes." Before Emma could respond, the car slowed to a stop in front of a sleek high-rise in the heart of downtown. The driver stepped out, opening an umbrella before coming around to open their door. Alexander exited first, then extended his hand to help Emma navigate the awkward process of maneuvering her waterlogged wedding dress out of the car. The lobby was all marble and glass, with a security guard who nodded respectfully as Alexander guided Emma toward a private elevator. She was acutely aware of the spectacle she made, soaking wet, makeup smeared, wedding dress muddied at the hem, but Alexander acted as if escorting a bedraggled bride through his building was perfectly normal. "The penthouse takes up the entire top floor," Alexander explained as the elevator ascended smoothly. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, lives in a separate apartment on the floor below. She manages the household when I'm away." The elevator doors opened directly into a vast open space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Despite her emotional state, Emma couldn't help but gasp at the sight. The penthouse was minimalist in design, clean lines, neutral colors, and strategic lighting that highlighted selected pieces of modern art. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you, though I can't take credit for the design. My sister Victoria is an interior designer. She insisted on handling it when I bought the place 3 years ago." A petite Asian woman in her 60s appeared from what Emma assumed was the kitchen area. Her expression remained impressively neutral at the sight of Emma's bedraggled state. "Mr. Reed, I wasn't expecting you home tonight," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of an accent. "Change of plans, Mrs. Chen. This is Emma Mitchell. She'll be accompanying me to the Hamptons tonight. Could you please help her find something dry to wear, and perhaps a hot drink?" Mrs. Chen nodded, giving Emma a warm smile. "Of course. Come with me, Miss Mitchell. Let's get you comfortable." Emma followed Mrs. Chen down a hallway, feeling oddly detached from reality. 24 hours ago, she'd been having her final dress fitting, giddy with excitement about her wedding. Now she was in a billionaire's penthouse, about to change out of her ruined wedding dress. Mrs. Chen led her to a spacious guest suite with its own bathroom. "There should be robes in the bathroom. I'll find you some clothes that might fit, and I'll have tea ready when you come out." Left alone, Emma stood motionless for a moment, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She barely recognized herself. Her carefully styled hair hung in wet tangles, her makeup was a disaster, and her once beautiful dress was a sodden, dirty mess. A sudden, overwhelming wave of grief hit her. With trembling fingers, she began to undo the buttons at the back of her dress, tears streaming down her face. Each button felt like undoing another piece of the future she'd planned. By the time she'd stepped out of the dress, leaving it in a heap on the bathroom floor, she was sobbing. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that made her entire body shake. She stood under the hot shower for a long time, letting the water wash away her tears along with the ruined makeup and the residual chill from the rain. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a plush robe, she felt emptied out, not better exactly, but hollowed, as if she'd cried out everything inside her and now existed as nothing more than a shell. True to her word, Mrs. Chen had left clothes on the bed, a pair of soft gray sweatpants, a white t-shirt, a navy blue cashmere sweater, and new undergarments still with tags attached. Everything fit reasonably well, if a bit loose. Emma briefly wondered who these clothes belonged to, but was too emotionally exhausted to dwell on it. When she emerged from the guest suite, her face scrubbed clean and her wet hair combed back, Alexander was sitting on one of the sleek sofas in the living area, working on a laptop. He looked up as she approached, setting the computer aside. "Better?" he asked. Emma nodded, taking a seat in a chair opposite him. Mrs. Chen appeared with a tray holding a teapot and 2 cups, along with a plate of small sandwiches. The aroma of the tea, something herbal and soothing, made Emma realize she hadn't eaten since breakfast. "Thank you," she said to Mrs. Chen, who nodded kindly before disappearing back to the kitchen. "You should eat something," Alexander said, pouring tea for both of them. "It's been a long day." Emma took a sandwich, biting into it mechanically. "What happens now?" she asked after swallowing. "My pilot has filed a flight plan. We leave for the Hamptons in about an hour. Unless you've changed your mind?" Emma considered the question seriously. The shock was beginning to wear off, and the reality of what she was doing, flying to the Hamptons with a man she'd just met, was setting in. Yet the alternative, going back to her apartment, facing friends and family, dealing with the aftermath of being jilted, seemed unbearable. "No," she said finally, "I haven't changed my mind." Alexander nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "Mrs. Chen will pack some essentials for you. Is there anything specific you need?" Emma thought about her apartment filled with reminders of James. "No, nothing there I want right now." They finished their tea in companionable silence. Alexander didn't press her to talk, for which Emma was grateful. The quiet gave her space to breathe, to begin processing the seismic shift in her life. As they prepared to leave for the airport, Mrs. Chen handed Emma a small suitcase. "Just some basics, toiletries, a few changes of clothes. The house in the Hamptons is well stocked, but if you need anything else, just ask Mr. Reed." The trip to the private airfield was quick, the rain having finally subsided. Emma felt a strange sense of unreality as she boarded the sleek private jet with Reed Enterprises emblazoned on the side. The interior was luxurious, but understated. cream leather seats, polished wood accents, and ambient lighting that created a peaceful atmosphere. "Make yourself comfortable," Alexander said, gesturing to the seats. "The flight is just under an hour." Once they were airborne, Emma gazed out the window at the glittering city below, growing smaller by the second. It felt symbolic somehow, her old life receding into the distance, becoming tiny and insignificant from this new perspective. "Tell me about your company," she said, turning to Alexander, who was reviewing documents at a small desk area. "What exactly does Reed Enterprises do?" Alexander set aside his papers, seeming relieved by the neutral topic. "We develop AI solutions for healthcare. Our primary product is an AI system that can predict potential health issues before symptoms appear, allowing for preventative treatment." "That sounds revolutionary," Emma said, genuinely impressed. "It has the potential to be. We're still in the early stages with some aspects, but the preliminary results have been promising." A hint of genuine passion animated his features as he spoke about his work. "What about you? What do you do?" "I'm a financial analyst at Meridian Consulting," Emma replied. "Or I was. I was supposed to start a new position next week at James's family's company." She faltered, the reality of her situation hitting her anew. "I guess that's not happening now." "Their loss," Alexander said simply. "Good financial analysts are hard to find." Emma appreciated his matter-of-fact response. No pity, no platitudes, just a straightforward acknowledgement of her professional value. "You know," she said after a moment, "I always wanted to work for a tech company. The innovation, the potential for real change, it's exciting. But James thought finance was more stable." "And what do you think?" Emma considered the question. "I think I spent too much time planning a life around what James wanted and not enough figuring out what I wanted." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "Then perhaps this is an opportunity, albeit one that came in a painful package." "An opportunity," Emma repeated, testing the word. It felt strange applying such a positive term to the wreckage of her plans. Yet there was truth in it too. For the first time in years, she had no obligations, no expectations to meet, no future mapped out for her. As the plane began its descent toward the Hamptons, Emma felt a curious mixture of emotions: grief for what she'd lost, fear of the uncertainty ahead, but also, unexpectedly, a flicker of something that felt almost like freedom. Alexander had been right about one thing: she couldn't sit in the rain forever. Whatever came next, she would face it standing. Night had fallen by the time they landed, the private airstrip illuminated by rows of soft lights. A sleek black SUV waited for them on the tarmac, the driver standing at attention beside it. Emma followed Alexander into the vehicle, feeling a peculiar mix of exhaustion and alertness. The events of the day seemed to have heightened her senses, making her acutely aware of details she might normally have overlooked: the subtle scent of leather in the car, the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore, the way Alexander's profile looked in the intermittent passing of streetlights. They drove through quiet roads lined with massive secluded properties, most hidden behind tall hedges or ornate gates. Finally, the SUV turned down a private drive flanked by ancient oak trees, their branches creating a natural archway. At the end of the drive, the house appeared, a modern interpretation of a classic Hamptons estate, all clean lines and expansive glass, perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. "Home away from home," Alexander said as the car came to a stop, "though I don't get here as often as I'd like." The driver opened Emma's door, and she stepped out, immediately greeted by the salt-tinged breeze. Despite the late hour, the moon was bright enough to illuminate the vastness of the ocean beyond the property, a dark, shimmering expanse that seemed to stretch into infinity. "It's beautiful," Emma said softly. Alexander nodded, gesturing for her to follow him. The main house was built in the 1920s, but I had it completely renovated 3 years ago. The guest house is newer. I added it last year when my sister started bringing her family for visits. They entered through massive double doors into a foyer that managed to be both impressive and welcoming. Like the penthouse, the design was modern but not cold, with warm woods balancing the clean white walls and strategic lighting highlighting artwork and architectural features. "Henry will bring your bag to the guest house," Alexander said, indicating the driver who was retrieving their luggage from the SUV. "Would you like something to eat first? Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper who manages this property, always keeps the kitchen well stocked." Emma shook her head. "Thank you, but I think I just need sleep. It's been—" She trailed off, unable to find a word adequate to describe the day. "Of course," Alexander said, understanding in his eyes. "The guest house has its own kitchen if you get hungry later. Come, I'll show you." They exited through glass doors at the back of the house onto a stone terrace. The ocean view was even more spectacular from here, the sound of waves a constant, soothing backdrop. A path of illuminated stepping stones led through a meticulously landscaped garden to a smaller structure about 100 yards from the main house. The guest house was a miniature version of the main building, with the same modern aesthetic. Inside, it was a single open space with different areas defined by furniture groupings: a small living room with a fireplace, a dining area adjacent to a compact but complete kitchen, and a sleeping area with a king-sized bed partially secluded by decorative screens. One entire wall was glass, offering an unobstructed view of the ocean. "The bathroom is through that door," Alexander said, pointing to a pocket door near the bed. "There's a walk-in closet with extra linens, robes, that sort of thing. The kitchen should have basics, but if you need anything else, just use the house phone. It connects directly to the main house or to Mrs. Reynolds's cottage, which is on the other side of the property." Emma moved to the glass wall, staring out at the moonlight playing on the waves. The guest house was more luxurious than any hotel she'd ever stayed in, yet it had a cozy, intimate feeling that was instantly comforting. "This is incredibly generous," she said, turning back to Alexander. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary," he replied. "Consider it a temporary sanctuary while you figure out your next steps." He paused, then added, "I should warn you that I have to return to the city tomorrow afternoon for meetings. I'll be back Friday evening. But Mrs. Reynolds will be here if you need anything, and you're welcome to make yourself at home. Use the pool, the private beach, whatever you like." Emma nodded, a flicker of relief mixing with an unexpected twinge of disappointment. Part of her had been counting on Alexander's presence as a distraction, someone new and unconnected to her life with James. But another part recognized that solitude might be exactly what she needed. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Actually, I think some time alone might be good for me." "The Wi-Fi password is on the desk," Alexander said, moving toward the door. "Sleep well, Emma. Things often look clearer in the morning." After he'd gone, Emma stood motionless for several minutes, listening to the waves and trying to process the surreal turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she'd been rehearsing her wedding vows. Now she was in a billionaire's guest house, adrift in a life suddenly devoid of its carefully constructed plans. She moved to the closet, finding it stocked with fresh towels, robes, and even a selection of new sleepwear. Selecting a soft cotton nightgown, she padded to the bathroom, which was a marvel of marble and glass. The shower had multiple jets and a rainfall showerhead, and the soaking tub was positioned beside a window with a view of a small, private Japanese garden. Under different circumstances, Emma would have been ecstatic to experience such luxury. Now she simply went through the motions of readying for bed, her mind a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and emotions. After a quick shower, she climbed into the impossibly comfortable bed, expecting sleep to elude her. Instead, the emotional exhaustion of the day claimed her almost immediately, pulling her into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning arrived, with golden light streaming through the glass wall, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a blissful moment, Emma existed in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, aware only of comfort and warmth. Then reality rushed back, bringing with it a fresh wave of pain. James had left her at the altar. Her carefully planned future had evaporated. She was in a stranger's guest house, with no clear idea of what came next. Emma sat up, pushing her tangled hair back from her face. The clock on the nightstand read 9:17 a.m. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept past 7. Her job had required early hours, and wedding planning had filled her weekends with dawn-to-dusk appointments. The thought of appointments triggered a new wave of anxiety. There would be vendors to contact, deposits to reclaim or forfeit, honeymoon reservations to cancel, and explanations, endless explanations to everyone who had known about the wedding. The mere idea was overwhelming. A gentle knock at the door pulled her from these thoughts. Wrapping herself in a robe, Emma went to answer it, finding a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," the woman said with a warm smile. "I'm Eleanor Reynolds, the housekeeper. Mr. Reed asked me to check if you needed anything this morning." "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Reynolds," Emma replied, tightening the robe's belt. "I think I'm okay for now, thank you." "I've left breakfast on the terrace of the main house," Mrs. Reynolds continued. "Mr. Reed mentioned you might join him before he leaves for the city, but if you'd prefer to eat here, I'm happy to bring something over." Emma hesitated. Part of her wanted to hide away, to avoid facing another human being while she was still so raw. But the prospect of sitting alone with her thoughts was equally unappealing. "I'll join him," she decided. "Just give me 20 minutes to get ready." After Mrs. Reynolds left, Emma inspected the clothes Mrs. Chen had packed for her. There were several casual outfits: jeans, t-shirts, a couple of sundresses, along with underwear, a swimsuit, and even a light jacket. Everything was new, tags still attached, but fit her reasonably well. She selected a simple blue sundress and sandals, quickly styled her hair into a messy bun, and applied a minimal amount of makeup from the travel kit Mrs. Chen had thoughtfully included. Following the stepping stone path back to the main house, Emma found Alexander on the terrace, reading something on a tablet while sipping coffee. He looked up as she approached, setting the device aside. "Good morning," he said, rising to pull out a chair for her. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Emma admitted, taking the offered seat. "Thank you again for all of this. I know it must seem strange, taking in a complete stranger the way you have." Alexander poured coffee into a delicate porcelain cup and passed it to her. "Not so strange when you've been on the other side of a life-altering event. Sometimes the kindness of strangers is easier to accept than the sympathy of friends." The breakfast spread was impressive. Fresh fruit, pastries, smoked salmon, eggs prepared several ways. Emma selected a croissant and some berries, suddenly aware of her hunger. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the sound of waves and seabirds creating a peaceful backdrop. "May I ask you something?" Emma said eventually. Alexander nodded, setting down his coffee cup. "You mentioned that someone helped you when your life was shattered. What happened, if you don't mind my asking?" Alexander's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, an old pain, carefully contained. "My fiancé died," he said simply. 5 years ago. Car accident, 2 months before our wedding." "I'm so sorry," Emma said softly, genuinely moved by the unexpected revelation. "It was a long time ago," Alexander replied, though his tone suggested the wound wasn't as healed as his words implied. "But in the aftermath, a former professor of mine offered me the use of his cabin in the mountains. Being away from my regular life, from the constant reminders and the well-meaning but exhausting sympathy, gave me space to begin processing what had happened." Emma nodded, understanding completely. "That's exactly what I needed. Space away from everyone who knows, who would look at me with pity or curiosity. I couldn't bear it, not yet." "The offer stands for as long as you need," Alexander said. "A day, a week, however long it takes for you to feel ready to face your life again." "Thank you," Emma said, feeling a genuine connection to this man who had known a loss perhaps even greater than her own. It explained his generosity, his intuitive understanding of what she needed. Alexander left for the city shortly after breakfast, departing in a helicopter that landed on a pad at the far end of the property. Emma stood on the terrace watching it lift off, the downdraft creating ripples in the swimming pool's surface before the aircraft banked toward Manhattan and disappeared from view. "Is there anything specific you'd like for lunch, Miss Mitchell?" Mrs. Reynolds appeared beside her, gathering the breakfast dishes onto a tray. "Please, call me Emma," she replied, "and I'm not sure I'll be hungry after that breakfast." Mrs. Reynolds smiled warmly. "Well, I'll be preparing a light salad with seafood for myself around 1. You're welcome to join me in the kitchen, or I can bring it to you wherever you'd like." "The kitchen would be nice, actually. I feel a bit lost in all this space." "Understandable. This place can feel quite grand when you're alone. Mr. Reed usually works when he's here, so he doesn't mind the solitude." Emma helped carry a few dishes inside, following Mrs. Reynolds through the main house. The kitchen was a chef's dream: professional-grade appliances, marble countertops, and an enormous island with bar seating. Unlike the more formal areas of the house, the kitchen had a lived-in feel that Emma found comforting. "Mr. Reed mentioned you might want some time to yourself," Mrs. Reynolds said as she loaded the dishwasher. "But if you'd like a tour of the property, I'd be happy to show you around." "Maybe later," Emma replied. "I think I'll explore a bit on my own first." Left to her own devices, Emma decided to wander the grounds. The property was extensive, meticulously landscaped near the house but gradually transitioning to more natural vegetation as it extended toward the beach. A winding path led down the bluff to a pristine stretch of private shoreline, where a small boathouse stood at one end. Emma removed her sandals, letting her feet sink into the cool sand. The beach was completely deserted, giving her a sense of peaceful isolation. She walked along the water's edge, letting the gentle waves wash over her toes, her mind finally having space to process the tumult of emotions she'd been suppressing. Anger came first, hot and sharp, directed at James for his cowardice. A text message. He hadn't even had the decency to tell her in person, to explain why he'd changed his mind. 5 years together ended with 7 words on a screen. The anger gave way to humiliation as she remembered standing in the church vestibule, watching the concerned expressions of the wedding coordinator and her bridesmaids as minutes ticked by with no sign of the groom. The whispers from the guests, the pitying glances, the awkward moment when her father had to announce that the wedding would not be taking place. And beneath it all, a profound sadness. Not just for the loss of James, but for the loss of the future she'd imagined. The house they'd planned to buy in the suburbs, the children they'd talked about having, the life they'd carefully mapped out together. Emma found a flat rock and sat down, watching the waves. A painful question had been circling her mind since yesterday. Had there been signs she'd missed? Had James been having doubts all along? She thought back to the weeks leading up to the wedding, searching for clues. He had been distant, she realized. She'd attributed it to pre-wedding stress, to the pressure of his new promotion at his family's company. But there had been other things too. Calls he'd step outside to take, late nights at the office, a growing impatience with her wedding planning enthusiasm. The truth hit her with sudden clarity. James had been pulling away for months. She'd been so caught up in wedding details and so committed to their planned future that she'd ignored the evidence right in front of her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Sarah. "How are you? Still alive? Need me to come rescue you from Billionaire Island?" Despite everything, Emma smiled. Sarah's protective instincts had been in overdrive since yesterday. "I'm fine," she typed back. "The place is beautiful. Alexander left for meetings in the city. I'm alone except for the housekeeper." 3 dots appeared immediately, followed by Sarah's response. "Alone? Is that good or bad? And have you checked the news? You're trending." Emma's stomach dropped. "What do you mean trending?" Sarah's reply came with a link to a gossip website. Emma clicked it, feeling a fresh wave of nausea as she saw the headline, "Jilted Bride of Suarez Heir Disappears with Tech Billionaire." The article was brief but devastating, describing how James Suarez, heir to the Suarez development fortune, had called off his wedding to unknown financial analyst Emma Mitchell, who was later seen leaving the church with Alexander Reed, notorious bachelor and tech wunderkind. There was even a blurry photo, clearly taken from a distance, showing her entering Alexander's car in her ruined wedding dress. "How did they even get this?" Emma typed furiously. "We were alone." "Someone at the church must have tipped them off," Sarah replied. "James's family is well known in certain circles, and Reed is basically a celebrity. It's a perfect storm for gossip." Emma leaned back against the rock, feeling violated. Not only had her personal tragedy been made public, but it had been twisted into something tawdry and sensational. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Alexander. "Just saw the article. I'm sorry, I should have anticipated this. My PR team is asking if you'd like them to issue a statement clarifying that you're a friend staying at my guest house while dealing with a personal matter. No details necessary." Emma considered the offer. Part of her wanted to scream the truth to the world, that James was a coward who'd abandoned her without explanation. But another part, a stronger part, recoiled at the idea of feeding the public narrative. "No statement," she replied. "I don't want to engage with it at all." "Understood," came Alexander's swift response. "For what it's worth, these stories typically have a 24-hour lifespan unless fueled by new developments. Lay low, and it will likely blow over." Emma set her phone aside, suddenly exhausted. She lay back on the rock, staring up at the cloudless blue sky. The sun was warm on her face, the sound of waves rhythmic and soothing. Despite the chaos swirling around her life, there was peace in this moment, in this place. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, Mrs. Reynolds was gently shaking her shoulder. "Emma, I'm sorry to disturb you, but you've been in the sun for quite a while. I was getting concerned." Emma sat up groggily, realizing her skin felt hot and tight. "What time is it?" "Nearly 2. I've been looking for you to offer lunch." Emma followed Mrs. Reynolds back up the path to the house, her mind clearing as they walked. The housekeeper led her to the kitchen where a beautiful seafood salad waited on the island. "Thank you for coming to find me," Emma said as they sat down to eat. "I didn't mean to fall asleep out there." "The beach has that effect," Mrs. Reynolds replied with a smile. "It's why Mr. Reed comes here when he needs to decompress. There's something about the sound of the waves that puts things in perspective." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Mrs. Reynolds spoke again. "I hope you don't mind my saying so, but Mr. Reed mentioned a bit about your situation. Not details, just that you'd experienced a significant personal setback and needed space." Emma nodded, appreciating Alexander's discretion. "I've worked for Mr. Reed for 3 years," Mrs. Reynolds continued, "and this is the first time he's ever invited someone to stay here alone. He values his privacy greatly." "I got that impression," Emma said. "I'm grateful for his kindness. It was exactly what I needed, though I didn't know it at the time." Mrs. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "He's a good man beneath the businessman exterior. He's been through his own difficulties." "He mentioned losing his fiancée," Emma said softly. "Yes, Catherine. Lovely woman. They were quite devoted to each other. Her death changed him, made him more reserved, more focused on work. This place was actually purchased after she died. I think he needed somewhere to escape the memories in the city." This new information shifted Emma's understanding of Alexander somewhat. His beach house wasn't just a wealthy man's vacation property. It was a sanctuary created in response to grief, a place of healing he was now sharing with her. After lunch, Emma returned to the guest house, intent on avoiding her phone and the outside world for a while longer. She found a paperback novel on the bedside table, a literary thriller she'd been meaning to read but never had the time for. Curling up on a comfortable chair by the glass wall, she lost herself in the story, grateful for the distraction. As evening approached, she ventured back to the main house to find something for dinner. Mrs. Reynolds had left a note explaining that she'd gone to her cottage for the evening but had prepared a pasta dish that Emma could heat in the microwave whenever she was hungry. Emma ate at the kitchen island, accompanied only by the sound of the waves outside. The silence, which might have seemed oppressive under different circumstances, felt cleansing somehow. No explanations to give, no sympathetic platitudes to endure, no decisions to make, just the simple act of existing in the moment. After dinner, she found herself drawn to Alexander's study, a warm space lined with bookshelves and featuring a large desk positioned to take advantage of the ocean view. A photograph on the desk caught her attention. Alexander with a woman who must have been Catherine. They were on a boat, laughing into the camera, looking impossibly young and carefree. Emma studied Catherine's face. Beautiful, but not in a conventional way, with intelligent eyes and a smile that suggested a sharp wit. Setting the photo down carefully, Emma felt a complex emotion she couldn't quite name, a kinship with this woman she'd never met, whose absence had shaped Alexander just as James's betrayal was now shaping her. Back in the guest house, Emma wrapped herself in a blanket and sat on the small porch, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. For the first time since reading James's text, she felt a sense of possibility rather than just loss, as if the unraveling of her carefully constructed plans might lead to something unexpected but potentially valuable. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or the day after that, but sitting under the stars, with the sound of waves as a constant companion, she found she could face that uncertainty with something approaching courage. Emma awoke the next morning to the sound of rain pattering against the glass wall. The ocean beyond was a churning mass of gray, white-capped waves breaking against the shore with far more force than they had the previous day. The weather matched her mood, unsettled, turbulent, but with an underlying rhythm that suggested purpose beneath the chaos. She made coffee in the guest house kitchen, then wrapped herself in one of the plush robes from the closet and settled on the covered portion of the porch. The rain created a curtain of water at the edge of the roof, isolating her in a peaceful cocoon where she could watch the storm without being touched by it. Her phone, which she'd been avoiding since seeing the gossip article, lay on the side table. Taking a deep breath, she picked it up, bracing herself for whatever awaited her. 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, 98 email notifications. Emma scrolled through them, anxiety building. Her parents, worried and confused, colleagues, curious and concerned, friends offering support or fishing for details. And James, 3 messages, the most recent sent late last night. "We need to talk. Please call me, Emma. I know you're with Reed. This isn't like you. I'm worried." A bitter laugh escaped her. Now he was worried? After abandoning her at the altar with nothing but a text message? His audacity was breathtaking. She opened her parents' messages first. Her mother's were increasingly frantic, culminating in a threat to file a missing persons report if she didn't call immediately. Her father's were more measured, asking her to check in when she felt able. Emma composed a quick text to both of them. "I'm safe, staying with a friend. Need time to process. We'll call soon." Sarah had sent several updates about the situation back home. James's family had issued a terse statement about the mutually agreed postponement of the wedding, a fiction that made Emma's blood boil. Sarah also reported that James had been by Emma's apartment multiple times, and that he'd enlisted mutual friends to try to locate her. The last message from Sarah had come in just an hour ago. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You look amazing in that photo." Puzzled, Emma typed back, "What photo?" Sarah's response was immediate, including a link to another gossip site. This time the headline read, "Jilted bride living her best life at Reed's Hamptons estate." The accompanying photo showed Emma on the beach, sitting on the rock where she'd fallen asleep the day before. She was looking out at the ocean, her expression contemplative. It was actually a flattering image. The wind tousling her hair, the elegant simplicity of the blue sundress, the natural beauty of the setting. But the violation of privacy infuriated her. How had they gotten this picture? The beach was private property. Someone must have taken it from a boat offshore using a telephoto lens. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone rang with Alexander's name on the screen. "I just saw the new article," she said by way of greeting. "I did too. I've already spoken with local security. They'll be patrolling the waterfront more actively to prevent further intrusions." Alexander's voice was calm but held an undercurrent of anger. "I'm sorry, Emma. I should have anticipated this." "It's not your fault," she said, watching a particularly large wave crash against the shore. "I just don't understand why anyone cares. I'm nobody. You're a beautiful woman who was left at the altar by the heir to a property development empire and who is now staying at the home of a tech CEO who rarely entertains guests. It's catnip for a certain type of publication." Alexander sighed. "The good news is, as I mentioned yesterday, these stories have a short shelf life. Give it another day or two, and some other scandal will capture their attention." "I hope you're right. I've never had this kind of attention before. It's unsettling." "How are you otherwise?" Alexander asked, his tone softening. "Besides the unwanted publicity?" Emma considered the question. "I'm not sure. Everything still feels surreal, but being here, away from everything, is helping. I can think more clearly." "That's good to hear." There was a pause, then Alexander continued. "I've had a meeting rescheduled, which means I'll be returning to the Hamptons earlier than expected. I should be there by dinner time." "Oh," Emma said, surprised by the flutter of anticipation she felt. "I'll make sure I'm not in your way." "You couldn't possibly be in my way," Alexander replied. "In fact, I was thinking we might have dinner together if you're feeling up to company. Mrs. Reynolds makes an excellent coq au vin." "I'd like that," Emma said, realizing she meant it. Despite her general desire for solitude, the prospect of Alexander's company was appealing. Perhaps because he understood loss in a way few people did, or perhaps simply because he expected nothing from her. No explanations, no decisions, no emotional reassurance. After ending the call, Emma continued working through her messages, responding selectively. To her closest friends, she sent brief reassurances that she was okay and needed time. To her colleagues, she explained that she was taking a personal leave of absence. To James, she sent nothing. The rain continued all morning, keeping Emma indoors. She found herself in the main house, drawn to the library, a cozy room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable reading chairs positioned near a fireplace. Mrs. Reynolds had lit a fire to ward off the chill brought by the storm, and the crackling flames created a hypnotic focal point as Emma browsed the shelves. Alexander's taste in books was eclectic and thoughtful. Literary fiction shared space with scientific journals, historical biographies, and philosophical treatises. Emma selected a collection of essays on resilience by various authors and settled into a chair near the fire. Hours passed as she read, occasionally making notes in a journal she'd found in the desk drawer. The essays sparked deep reflection about her own situation, not just the wedding that wasn't, but the relationship that had led to it. With the clarity of distance, Emma began to see patterns she'd overlooked before. James had always been subtly controlling, positioning his preferences as objectively better choices. His family's expectations had shaped their relationship in ways she'd accepted without question. Even her career path had been influenced by his insistence that she join his family's company after the wedding, despite her interest in other fields. The realization was uncomfortable but liberating. Perhaps the collapse of their wedding wasn't just a personal tragedy, but an opportunity. A chance to reclaim aspects of herself she'd compromised away. The rain began to taper off in the afternoon, and Emma decided to brave the damp for a walk. Borrowing a raincoat from a closet near the back door, she set out along a different path than she'd taken the day before, this one leading toward a wooded area at the edge of the property. The forest was peaceful after the rain, droplets still falling from leaves with soft, musical plops. Emma breathed deeply, enjoying the clean, earthy scent. A narrow trail wound between the trees, eventually opening onto a small clearing where a wooden bench faced a tranquil pond. Emma sat watching ripples form on the water's surface as the occasional raindrop fell. This place felt hidden, secret, a private retreat even within the larger sanctuary of the property. She wondered if Alexander came here often, seeking solitude from the demands of his public life. The sound of a helicopter in the distance signaled Alexander's return. Emma made her way back to the house, arriving just as Alexander was descending the steps from the helipad, briefcase in hand. He wore a tailored suit that emphasized his lean, athletic build, though he'd loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar, small concessions to the casual setting of the beach house. "Welcome back," Emma called, feeling suddenly self-conscious in her borrowed raincoat and slightly muddy boots. Alexander turned at the sound of her voice, a smile warming his features. "Emma, how was your day?" "Quiet, reflective. I spent most of it reading in the library before the rain let up enough for a walk." They fell into step together, walking toward the main house. "Did you find the pond?" Alexander asked. "Yes, it's beautiful, so peaceful. That's my favorite spot on the property," Alexander admitted. "When things get overwhelming, I sit there and remember that still waters exist, even when life feels turbulent." The simple poetry of his words touched Emma. It was a side of him she hadn't expected, this contemplative, almost philosophical aspect beneath the successful businessman exterior. At the house, they parted ways to change for dinner. Emma returned to the guest house where she found that Mrs. Reynolds had already been by to turn on lights and add fresh flowers to the small dining table. Opening the closet, Emma was pleased to discover that the housekeeper had also added a few more clothing options, including a simple but elegant black dress that would be perfect for dinner. After showering and changing, Emma spent more time than usual on her appearance, applying makeup with care and styling her hair in loose waves. She told herself it was simply about feeling normal again, reclaiming a routine that had nothing to do with impressing Alexander. But as she spritzed on a light perfume she'd found in the bathroom, she couldn't ignore the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. The main house was transformed in the evening light, with subtle illumination highlighting architectural features and creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. Emma found Alexander in the kitchen, casually dressed now in dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms as he uncorked a bottle of wine. "Mrs. Reynolds has outdone herself," he said by way of greeting, gesturing to the array of covered dishes warming on the stove. "She insisted on preparing everything before leaving for the evening." "It smells amazing," Emma replied, accepting the glass of wine he offered. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, a momentary contact that sent an unexpected current up her arm. Alexander raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said simply. Emma touched her glass to his, repeating the phrase. "To new beginnings." As they carried their plates to the dining room, an elegant space with a table that could seat 12 but had been intimately set for 2 at one end, Emma felt a strange sense of rightness, as if the chaos of the past days had been leading her exactly where she needed to be. The dining room was bathed in the golden glow of candles and subtle recessed lighting. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the last hints of sunset painted the sky in dramatic pinks and purples, providing a spectacular backdrop for their meal. Mrs. Reynolds had set the table with fine china, crystal, and silver, creating an atmosphere of casual elegance. "This feels like a date," Emma said with a nervous laugh as Alexander held her chair. "I didn't mean to impose on your evening this way." "Is that what you're worried about?" Alexander asked, taking his own seat across from her. That you're imposing? Emma shrugged, arranging her napkin in her lap. A little. You've been incredibly generous, and I don't want to take advantage. You're not, he said simply. In fact, I find I'm enjoying the company. This house can feel empty sometimes. They began with a delicate salad of fresh greens, pears, and walnuts in a light vinaigrette. The coq au vin that followed was, as Alexander had promised, excellent. Tender chicken in a rich wine sauce, accompanied by roasted vegetables and crusty bread. So, Alexander said as he refilled their wine glasses, have you thought about what comes next? After you leave here, I mean. Emma considered the question, cutting a small piece of chicken. I've been avoiding thinking about it, honestly, but I can't hide forever. It's not hiding to take time for yourself, Alexander pointed out. It's self-preservation. Maybe, Emma conceded, but there are practical considerations. My apartment lease is up in 2 months, and I was supposed to move into James's place after the honeymoon. My job? Well, I'd already given notice since I was going to start at Suarez Development. And most of my social circle is connected to James in some way. She sighed. It feels like I have to rebuild my entire life from scratch. That's daunting, Alexander acknowledged, but also potentially liberating. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. That's just it. Under the fear and hurt, there's this strange sense of, I don't know, possibility? Like I've been released from a path I didn't even realize was constraining me. Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. When Catherine died, after the initial shock and grief, I had a similar realization. We'd had our lives planned out in such detail. Where we'd live, how many children we'd have, even where we'd retire. Losing her was devastating, but it also forced me to imagine a completely different future for myself. That must have been incredibly difficult, Emma said softly. It was, Alexander admitted, but eventually I came to see that while I couldn't have the future we'd planned together, I could create something new. Different, but still meaningful. He paused, swirling the wine in his glass. What would you do if there were no constraints? If you could design your life exactly as you wanted? Emma was silent for a moment, considering. I'd probably leave finance, or at least shift to a different sector. I always wanted to work in tech, specifically in companies focused on positive social impact. Why didn't you? Alexander asked, genuinely curious. James thought finance was more stable, Emma replied, echoing her words from the plane. And his family had connections that made it an easier path, but I've always been fascinated by the intersection of technology and social good, companies that use innovation to address real-world problems. Like healthcare AI, Alexander suggested, referencing his own company's focus. Exactly like that, Emma agreed, warming to the topic. Using technology to make healthcare more accessible, more accurate, more preventative rather than reactive. It's exactly the kind of work that excites me. We're always looking for sharp financial minds at Reed Enterprises, Alexander said casually. People who understand both the numbers and the mission. Emma looked at him in surprise. Are you offering me a job? Not exactly, Alexander clarified. Just pointing out that the kind of career pivot you're describing isn't as far-fetched as you might think. When you're ready, of course. The conversation flowed easily after that, moving from careers to travel — they'd both loved Japan for entirely different reasons — to books — they shared a fondness for historical fiction — to music. Alexander preferred classical, while Emma had a soft spot for indie folk. With each topic, Emma felt layers of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying begin to dissolve. Shall we have dessert on the terrace? Alexander suggested as they finished the main course. The rain has stopped, and the night air is particularly clear after a storm. Emma agreed, helping him carry their wine glasses and the berry tart Mrs. Reynolds had prepared out to the terrace. The night had turned cool but not cold, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt and rain-washed earth. They sat in comfortable chairs positioned to face the ocean, now a vast darkness punctuated only by the distant lights of ships and the reflection of stars. "I've been talking about myself all evening," Emma realized aloud. "Tell me more about you. How did you start Reed Enterprises?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression reflective. "It wasn't the original plan. I was working for a larger tech company, developing AI algorithms for marketing purposes, essentially helping corporations target consumers more effectively. Lucrative, but not particularly fulfilling." "What changed?" Emma asked. "Catherine," he said simply. "She was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer at 31. The doctors caught it late because her early symptoms mimicked more common, less serious conditions. By the time they identified it correctly, she had less than a year." Emma's heart constricted. "I'm so sorry." Alexander nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "During her treatment, I became obsessed with the idea that technology could do better. That with the right algorithms, the right data, we could predict health issues before they became critical. Catherine encouraged me to pursue it, even as her own chances dwindled." He took a sip of wine before continuing. "After she died, I left my job and started Reed Enterprises with her life insurance money and my savings. The first few years were tough. A lot of skepticism, regulatory hurdles, funding challenges. But 5 years later, our systems are being implemented in hospitals across the country, and early studies suggest we're identifying conditions an average of 4 months earlier than traditional methods." "That's incredible," Emma said, genuinely impressed. "You've created something meaningful from your loss." "I like to think so," Alexander replied. "Catherine always said that suffering should be transformative, that if you have to go through something difficult, you should come out the other side with something valuable to show for it." They fell silent for a moment, both contemplating this idea. Emma wondered what transformation her own pain might lead to, what unexpected value might emerge from the collapse of her planned future. "May I ask you something personal?" she said eventually. Alexander nodded, his expression open. "Of course." "In the 5 years since Catherine died, has there been anyone else in your life?" Alexander considered the question, seemingly not offended by its intimate nature. "There have been a few relationships," he admitted. "Nothing lasting. I think part of me was comparing every woman to Catherine, which wasn't fair to them or to me." "And now?" Emma asked softly. Alexander met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Now I understand that there's no replacing what I lost. Any new relationship would be its own unique entity, not a substitute for what came before." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken implications. Emma was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way the dim lighting accentuated the strong lines of his profile, of the quiet intensity in his eyes when they met hers. A sudden vibration broke the moment. Emma's phone, which she'd set on the table beside her, lit up with an incoming call. James's name flashed on the screen. Alexander stood smoothly. "I'll give you some privacy," he said, gathering his wine glass. "I need to check on a few work emails anyway." "No, wait," Emma said, silencing the phone without answering. "I don't want to talk to him." Alexander paused, studying her face. "Are you sure? It might provide some closure." "I'm not ready for closure," Emma admitted. "I'm still figuring out how I feel about everything." Alexander nodded, understanding in his expression as he sat back down. "There's no timeline for processing something like this. You're allowed to take as long as you need." The phone buzzed again, this time with a text message. Emma glanced at it reflexively. "Please call me, Em. I made a terrible mistake. We need to talk." A wave of anger washed over her. "Now he decides it was a mistake," she said bitterly, showing Alexander the message. "After humiliating me in front of everyone we know, after forcing me to flee my own life, now he wants to talk." "What would you say to him if you did call?" Alexander asked, his tone neutral. Emma considered the question, surprised to find that the answer wasn't immediately clear. 2 days ago, she would have been desperate to hear James's explanation, to understand what had gone wrong. Now she wasn't sure it mattered. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to demand an explanation. Part of me wants to tell him how much he hurt me. And part of me wonders if I should be grateful." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Grateful? If he'd gone through with the wedding even though he had doubts, we might have ended up divorced a year from now, or 5 years from now. Or worse, stuck in a marriage neither of us really wanted." Emma shook her head. "I'm not saying I'm glad he did it the way he did, but maybe the outcome itself isn't the worst thing that could have happened." "That's a remarkably evolved perspective," Alexander said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "I'm not sure I fully believe it yet," Emma confessed, "but I'm starting to think it might be true." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the rhythm of the waves. Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions, lingering hurt and anger about James, gratitude for Alexander's understanding presence, and beneath it all, a subtle but undeniable attraction to the man beside her. It was too soon, she knew. Her emotions were too raw, her future too uncertain. And yet, she couldn't deny the connection she felt with Alexander, a connection that had somehow bridged the chasm between their very different lives. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For this." Emma gestured vaguely at the terrace, the ocean beyond, the entire situation. "For rescuing me from those church steps, for giving me space to think, to breathe, for treating me like a person worth knowing, not just a sad story." Alexander turned to her, his expression sincere. "You are worth knowing, Emma, regardless of the circumstances that brought you here." The simple conviction in his voice warmed something inside her, a spark of self-worth that James's abandonment had nearly extinguished. For the first time since reading that devastating text message, Emma felt truly seen, not as a jilted bride, not as an object of pity, but as herself. Emma woke to sunlight streaming through the glass wall of the guest house. For the first time since arriving, she felt genuinely rested, the emotional exhaustion of the past days finally beginning to lift. She stretched languorously, replaying the previous evening's dinner conversation in her mind. Something had shifted between her and Alexander, a deepening of connection, an acknowledgement of mutual attraction that neither had acted upon but both had recognized. After a quick shower, Emma dressed in white shorts and a light blue top, then made her way to the main house, drawn by the scent of coffee. She found Alexander in the kitchen, casually dressed in jeans and a faded Harvard t-shirt, reading something on his tablet while sipping from a steaming mug. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy in the daylight after the intimacy of their nighttime conversation. Alexander looked up, his expression warming. "Good morning. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in days," Emma admitted, accepting the cup of coffee he poured for her. "I feel almost normal." "Almost is progress," Alexander observed with a small smile. "Mrs. Reynolds left breakfast pastries in the warming drawer if you're hungry." They ate on the terrace, the morning sun casting a golden glow over the property. A comfortable silence settled between them, neither feeling the need to fill it with unnecessary conversation. Emma was struck by how natural it felt to share this quiet moment with Alexander, as if they'd known each other far longer than a few days. "I was thinking," Alexander said eventually, setting aside his empty coffee cup. "There's a farmer's market in town this morning. Would you like to go? It might be nice to get off the property for a bit." Emma hesitated, anxiety flickering. "Won't there be photographers? More gossip fodder?" "Possibly," Alexander acknowledged. "But the locals are pretty protective of privacy. It's one reason many prominent people have homes in this area. And frankly, hiding away indefinitely only gives the speculation more power." Emma considered this. The prospect of facing public scrutiny was daunting, but Alexander was right. She couldn't hide forever. And the idea of exploring beyond the confines of the property, beautiful as it was, had a certain appeal. All right, she decided. Let's go to the farmer's market. They took one of Alexander's less ostentatious vehicles, a well-maintained older model Jeep that he explained had belonged to Catherine. She insisted we needed something practical for beach trips and grocery runs, he said as they headed down the private drive. She hated the idea of taking a luxury car to buy milk. The casual reference to Catherine, offered without pain or awkwardness, struck Emma. Alexander had integrated his loss into his life in a way that allowed him to honor Catherine's memory without being imprisoned by grief. She wondered if she might eventually reach a similar accommodation with her own painful experience. The town was picturesque, a classic Hamptons village with shingled buildings, boutique shops, and glimpses of the ocean at the end of several streets. The farmers' market occupied a town square, with white tents housing vendors selling everything from organic produce to artisanal cheeses to handcrafted jewelry. As they walked among the stalls, Emma was aware of curious glances and whispers. She'd opted for large sunglasses and had pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail, but she still felt exposed, vulnerable to judgment and speculation. Alexander, seeming to sense her discomfort, placed a reassuring hand at the small of her back. "Just breathe," he murmured. "Most people are too caught up in their own lives to care about ours." The simple contact and the inclusive ours calmed her nerves. They browsed the market leisurely, Alexander greeting various vendors by name, introducing Emma simply as "my friend," without elaboration. They selected fresh produce, artisanal bread, and local honey, building a collection of items that Alexander explained they could incorporate into dinner that evening. "You cook?" Emma asked, surprised. "Catherine taught me the basics," Alexander replied. "I'm no chef, but I can manage simple meals, and cooking helps me relax after intense workdays." At a stall selling lavender products, Emma selected a small sachet for her growing collection of borrowed clothes in the guest house. As Alexander paid the vendor, Emma wandered a few steps away, drawn to a display of hand-painted silk scarves at the next booth. "Emma?" The familiar voice froze her in place. Slowly she turned to find Sarah standing there, eyes wide with surprise. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" Her friend engulfed her in a tight hug before answering. "My parents have a summer place here, remember? I came out last night to get away from all the drama back home." Sarah pulled back, studying Emma's face. "You look good. Really good, actually." "Thanks," Emma said, still processing the unexpected encounter. "I feel better than I did a few days ago." Sarah glanced over Emma's shoulder, her eyes widening further. "Is that him, Alexander Reed?" Emma turned to see Alexander watching them from a distance, giving her space for the reunion, but clearly attentive to her reaction. She nodded. "Holy crap, Em," Sarah whispered. "The photos don't do him justice. He's gorgeous, and the way he's looking at you." She squeezed Emma's arm. "Is something happening there?" "No, I mean, it's complicated," Emma replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "He's been kind, that's all." "Mm-hmm," Sarah hummed skeptically. "Well, kind is definitely an upgrade from left me at the altar with a text message. But speaking of that jerk," she hesitated. "What?" Emma prompted, sensing bad news. "James has been looking everywhere for you. He showed up at my apartment twice, called my parents, even went to your boss. He's telling everyone he made a terrible mistake and needs to explain." Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. What could he possibly explain that would make any difference? "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but he seems desperate. And, he's here." "Here? In the Hamptons?" Sarah nodded grimly. "He knew my parents have a place here, and he remembered me mentioning it was close to Reed's estate. He showed up at their door last night asking if I'd seen you. I denied it, of course, but..." She gestured around the market. He's probably still in town, looking for you." The thought of confronting James sent a wave of anxiety through Emma. She wasn't ready. Not for his explanations, not for his pleas, not for the emotional manipulation she now recognized had been a constant in their relationship. Alexander approached, having sensed her distress. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of concern. Emma introduced Sarah, explaining briefly that she was her maid of honor and closest friend. "And apparently," she added, "James is in town looking for me." Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "Do you want to leave?" "No," Emma decided, surprising herself with her own resolve. "I'm not going to let him dictate my actions anymore, but I'd like to finish our shopping quickly if you don't mind." "Of course," Alexander agreed, his hand returning to the small of her back in a protective gesture that wasn't lost on Sarah, whose eyebrows shot up meaningfully at Emma. They said goodbye to Sarah, who promised to call later, and completed their purchases in record time. As they headed back to the Jeep, Emma felt the tension in her shoulders gradually release. They had almost reached the vehicle when a voice called out behind them. "Emma, wait!" She didn't need to turn to recognize James's voice. For a moment, she considered ignoring him, climbing into the Jeep and driving away. But something stopped her, not affection or curiosity, but a sudden desire for closure on her own terms. "You should go," she said to Alexander. "I'll handle this." Alexander studied her face. "Are you sure?" Emma nodded. "I need to do this. I'll be fine." After a moment's hesitation, Alexander handed her the car keys. "I'll find my own way back. Take as long as you need." The gesture, his trust in her judgment, his respect for her independence, touched Emma deeply. She squeezed his hand in silent thanks before turning to face James. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his usually impeccable clothing rumpled. "Emma," he said again, approaching cautiously as if she might flee. "Thank God I found you." "What do you want, James?" Her voice was steadier than she'd expected. "To explain. To apologize. To fix this." He glanced at Alexander, who remained nearby, his posture alert. "Can we talk privately?" "Anything you have to say, you can say right here," Emma replied. James ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I made a terrible mistake, Em. I panicked. The wedding, the expectations, my family's pressure, it all became too much." "So you abandoned me at the altar? With a text message?" Emma's voice rose slightly. "Do you have any idea what that felt like?" "I know it was unforgivable," James admitted, his expression contrite. "But I've realized what I threw away. We can still fix this. We can reschedule the wedding, or elope, or whatever you want." Emma stared at him, feeling a curious detachment. This man, whom she'd planned to spend her life with, suddenly seemed like a stranger, or worse, like someone she'd never really known at all. "No, James," she said quietly. "We can't fix this. Because I don't want to." James blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "You don't mean that. You're upset, and I understand that. But we've been together for 5 years. You can't throw that away over one mistake." It wasn't just one mistake, Emma realized aloud. It was a pattern. You always putting your needs first, making decisions for both of us, assuming I'd go along with whatever you wanted. She shook her head. "I didn't see it until now, but I don't think we were ever truly partners." "That's not fair," James protested. "I loved you. I still love you." "Maybe you do," Emma conceded. "But not in the way I deserve to be loved." James's expression hardened, his gaze shifting to Alexander, who had maintained a respectful distance but remained watchful. "So that's it? You're trading me for him? How long has this been going on, Emma?" The accusation stung, but Emma refused to be baited. "There's nothing going on. Alexander offered me a place to stay when my world fell apart, which you caused, by the way. But even if there was something between us, it would be none of your business. You lost the right to question my choices when you sent that text." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the tense exchange. James, always conscious of appearances, seemed to suddenly register the public nature of their confrontation. He lowered his voice, adopting a more reasonable tone. "Look, let's not do this here. Come back to the city with me. We can talk properly, figure this out." "No," Emma said again, the single syllable firm and final. "I'm not coming back with you. Not now, not ever. We're done, James." She turned away, ignoring his continued protests, and walked to the Jeep. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked it and climbed inside, but a profound sense of calm had settled over her. As she drove away, she caught a glimpse of James in the rearview mirror, standing alone in the middle of the street, watching her go. Emma drove along the coastal road, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The confrontation with James played on a loop in her mind, but instead of the anguish she might have expected, she felt an unexpected lightness, as if she'd set down a heavy burden she'd been carrying for years without realizing it. She pulled the Jeep over at a scenic overlook, needing a moment to process. The ocean stretched out before her, vast and constant, its rhythmic waves a reminder that life continued regardless of personal upheavals. Emma took deep breaths of the salt-tinged air, allowing the reality of what had just happened to sink in. She had faced James. She had stood her ground. She had spoken truth she hadn't even fully acknowledged until the words were leaving her mouth. And in doing so, she had reclaimed something essential: her autonomy, her self-respect, her power to shape her own future. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "You were amazing. Call me later?" Then another message, this one from Alexander. "Everything all right?" Emma typed a quick response. "Yes, just taking a moment before heading back." Alexander's reply came immediately. "Take all the time you need. I'm here when you're ready." Those simple words, "I'm here when you're ready," touched her deeply. Not pushing, not demanding, just offering steady support while respecting her need for space. It was such a contrast to James's insistence, his assumption that he could simply decide they would reconcile and she would comply. After about 20 minutes, Emma felt composed enough to continue driving. When she returned to the beach house, she found Alexander on the terrace, working on his laptop. He looked up as she approached, his expression a careful mix of concern and restraint. "How did it go?" he asked simply. Emma sat in the chair beside him, looking out at the ocean. "Better than I expected. I told him it was over for good. How do you feel about that?" "Relieved," Emma replied without hesitation. Standing there facing him, I suddenly saw our relationship so clearly. All the ways he controlled things, all the compromises that only went one way. She shook her head. "I can't believe I was ready to marry him." "We often don't see patterns when we're in the middle of them," Alexander observed. "It's like trying to see the shape of a forest while standing among the trees." "Exactly." Emma turned to look at him. "Thank you for giving me space to handle it myself. James immediately assumed you and I were involved, and that's why I was refusing to reconcile." A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed Alexander's face. "That says more about him than about either of us." "It does," Emma agreed. "It never occurred to him that I might simply have realized I deserve better, that I might choose independence over a relationship that diminished me." She paused, then added softly, "He never really saw me." Alexander closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "And what do you see when you look at yourself now?" It was a profound question, one that made Emma pause and consider carefully. "Someone stronger than I realized," she said finally, echoing Alexander's words from their first meeting. "Someone who's been playing a part for too long, someone who's ready to discover who she really is, without James's expectations shaping her choices." Alexander smiled, genuine approval warming his features. "I think that someone sounds remarkable." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Emma was acutely aware of Alexander's proximity, of the intensity in his gaze, of her own quickening pulse. But it was too soon, the aftermath of her confrontation with James still too fresh. Alexander seemed to sense this, standing smoothly to break the tension. "Are you hungry? After all that, you must be." Grateful for the shift to more neutral territory, Emma nodded. They moved to the kitchen, where Alexander began unpacking their farmer's market purchases. Working together, they prepared a simple lunch of fresh bread, local cheeses, and summer fruits. The domestic activity was soothing, giving Emma's overstimulated emotions time to settle. "I had an interesting call this morning," Alexander mentioned as they sat down to eat. "From Sarah, actually." Emma looked up in surprise. "Sarah called you? How did she even get your number?" "Apparently she's quite resourceful," Alexander replied, amusement in his tone. "She managed to get through to my assistant by claiming she had urgent information regarding a personal matter." "That sounds like Sarah," Emma said, half exasperated, half impressed. "What did she want?" "To warn me that James was in town looking for you. She was concerned about how you might react to seeing him unexpectedly." Alexander spread some soft cheese on a piece of bread. "She cares about you a great deal. She's been my best friend since college," Emma explained. "She never liked James much, though she tried to hide it for my sake. I should have listened to her reservations." "Hindsight offers perfect clarity," Alexander observed, "but we make the best decisions we can with the information we have at the time." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the earlier tension gradually dissipating. Emma found herself studying Alexander when he wasn't looking. The strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the way his hands moved with precise, economical grace. She was attracted to him, she couldn't deny that. But it was more than physical. There was a depth to him, an integrity that drew her in. "I've been thinking," Emma said eventually. "I can't hide out here forever. I need to start making plans." Alexander nodded. "What are you considering?" "Going back to New York, for one thing. Finding a new apartment, looking for a job." She took a sip of water. "I meant what I said yesterday about wanting to work in tech. Maybe it's time I pursued that seriously." "I meant what I said too," Alexander replied. "Reed Enterprises could certainly benefit from someone with your financial background and interest in social impact. If you'd like, I could arrange for you to meet with our HR director when you're ready." Emma hesitated. "I appreciate that, but I don't want special treatment, and I don't want to complicate whatever this is between us." The words slipped out before she could reconsider them. Alexander's expression remained measured, but his eyes held hers with new intensity. "And what do you think this is between us, Emma?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. She considered deflecting but chose honesty instead. "I don't know exactly. A connection, an attraction, something that feels significant, even though we've known each other less than a week." "I feel it too," Alexander admitted quietly. "But I'm also aware of the circumstances. You're vulnerable right now, going through a major life transition. I don't want to take advantage of that." "I appreciate your consideration," Emma said, "but I'm not as fragile as you might think. My relationship with James was over long before he sent that text. I just didn't recognize it, and what I feel when I'm with you—" She paused, searching for the right words. "It feels real, genuine. Not a reaction to what happened, but something separate and valuable on its own." Alexander reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching hers. "Then perhaps we give it time. See where it leads naturally, without rushing or forcing anything." The simple contact sent warmth spreading up Emma's arm. "I'd like that," she said softly. After lunch, Alexander mentioned needing to handle some business calls. Emma decided to go for a swim, changing into the bathing suit Mrs. Chen had packed for her. The pool was heated to a perfect temperature, and Emma swam laps, enjoying the rhythmic physical activity after the emotional intensity of the morning. Later, she found herself drawn once again to the pond in the wooded area of the property. Sitting on the bench, watching dragonflies skim across the water's surface, Emma felt a profound sense of peace. In the span of just a few days, Her life had been completely upended, yet somehow she felt more centered, more authentically herself than she had in years. The sound of footsteps on the path alerted her to Alexander's approach. He looked relaxed, his business calls apparently concluded. "I thought I might find you here," he said, gesturing to the empty space beside her on the bench. "May I join you?" Emma nodded, and they sat in silence for a while, appreciating the tranquil setting together. "This place reminds me of a pond near my childhood home," Emma said eventually. "I used to go there whenever I needed to think, to be alone with my thoughts." "And what are your thoughts now?" Alexander asked gently. Emma considered the question. That sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to unexpected gifts. That strength often emerges from vulnerability. That I'm grateful, despite everything. Grateful? For the chance to rediscover myself, for this place. She turned to look at him directly. "For you." Alexander's expression softened. "I'm grateful too. When I stopped my car that day, I had no idea." He trailed off, seeming to search for the right words. "That you'd end up with a bedraggled bride invading your beach house?" Emma suggested with a smile. "That I'd meet someone who would make me feel things I thought I'd never feel again," Alexander corrected softly. The sincerity in his voice made Emma's heart race. They were close now, their shoulders almost touching on the bench. The moment stretched between them, possibility hanging in the air like the afternoon sunlight filtering through the trees. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Alexander leaned forward. Emma met him halfway, their lips touching in a gentle, tentative kiss. It was brief, almost chaste, yet Emma felt it throughout her entire body, a awakening, a promise, a beginning. When they separated, Alexander's eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of regret or discomfort. Emma smiled, reaching up to touch his face lightly. "That was nice," she said simply. "Yes, it was," he agreed, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "But we don't need to rush anything." "No," Emma agreed. "We have time." They walked back to the house hand in hand, the simple connection feeling both momentous and perfectly natural. Whatever was developing between them would unfold at its own pace. For now, it was enough to acknowledge the connection, to allow themselves to explore the possibilities it presented. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting golden light across the property, Emma felt a certainty she hadn't expected to find so soon after her life had fallen apart. This unexpected detour might just be leading her exactly where she needed to go. The next week passed in a gentle rhythm of shared meals, long walks on the beach, and quiet evenings filled with conversation. Emma and Alexander moved cautiously in their growing relationship, both aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. The kiss by the pond was followed by others, each a little longer, a little deeper, yet still restrained, as if they were both savoring the slow unfolding of possibility between them. During the days, Alexander worked from his home office, attending virtual meetings and fielding calls from his executive team. Emma used the time to begin rebuilding her life, making lists of apartments to view in New York, researching job opportunities in tech finance, and finally addressing the backlog of messages from friends and family. She called her parents, explaining as much as she felt comfortable sharing about her situation and her plans going forward. They were supportive if confused, her mother repeatedly expressing concern about Emma staying with a man you barely know. "I know him better than you think," Emma had replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Because it was true. In the intense crucible of the past week, she and Alexander had shared thoughts, fears, and hopes that typically took months or years to reveal. There was an honesty between them, a lack of pretense that felt both rare and precious. On Friday afternoon, Emma sat on the terrace with her laptop, finalizing appointments to see apartments the following week. The rental market in New York was notoriously competitive, but with her solid credit and employment history, she hoped to find something suitable without too much difficulty. "How's the apartment hunt going?" Alexander asked, emerging from the house with 2 glasses of iced tea. "I've scheduled viewings for 4 places on Tuesday," Emma replied, accepting the drink gratefully. "All in different neighborhoods, so I can get a feel for what might work best." Alexander nodded, taking the seat beside her. "And how do you feel about going back to the city?" Emma considered the question, watching a sailboat glide across the horizon. "Ready, I think. Nervous, but ready." She turned to him with a small smile. "This time away has been exactly what I needed, but I can't hide from reality forever." "You haven't been hiding," Alexander countered gently. "You've been healing. There's a difference." "Maybe you're right." Emma closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. "Either way, it's time to face the next chapter." A shadow of something, disappointment perhaps, crossed Alexander's face before he schooled his expression back to neutrality. "Of course, you need to rebuild your life." Emma studied him, suddenly understanding. "You think once I leave, whatever's been developing between us will end?" Alexander met her gaze. "I think long-distance relationships are challenging under the best of circumstances, and these aren't exactly typical circumstances." "No, they're not," Emma agreed. "But I'm not planning to disappear from your life, Alexander, unless that's what you want." "It's the last thing I want," he replied, his voice low and intense. "But I also don't want to hold you back. You're just beginning to rediscover who you are without James's influence. You should have the freedom to explore that fully." Emma reached across the table, taking his hand. "I appreciate your concern, but part of rediscovering myself is recognizing what I truly want. And right now, that includes seeing where this connection between us might lead." The tension in Alexander's shoulders eased visibly. "In that case, I have a suggestion. Reed Enterprises maintains an executive apartment in the city for visiting board members and VIP clients. It's currently unoccupied. You'd be welcome to use it while you're apartment hunting." Emma hesitated. "That's incredibly generous, but it would be strictly professional," Alexander clarified quickly. "No strings attached, just a practical solution to give you time to find the right place rather than rushing into something less than ideal." "I'll think about it," Emma promised, touched by the offer even as she recognized the need to maintain some independence. That evening they decided to go out for dinner, selecting a small, upscale restaurant in town that Alexander assured her was known for its discretion with high-profile guests. Emma wore the black dress she'd found in the guesthouse closet, paired with simple gold earrings she'd purchased during a shopping excursion with Mrs. Reynolds earlier in the week. When she emerged from the guest house, Alexander was waiting on the path, dressed in dark slacks and a light blue button-down that complemented his tanned skin. He stilled when he saw her, appreciation evident in his gaze. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Emma replied, suddenly shy under his admiring look. "So do you. Handsome, I mean." The restaurant was elegant but comfortable, with well-spaced tables and subtle lighting that created an intimate atmosphere. Their table overlooked a small garden, fairy lights twinkling among the foliage as darkness fell. They ordered a bottle of wine to share, and as they waited for their first course, Emma found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey of the past 10 days. From the devastation of being left at the altar to this moment of unexpected contentment in the company of a man who seemed to understand her in ways James never had. "Penny for your thoughts," Alexander said, noticing her pensive expression. "I was just thinking about how differently things have turned out from what I expected," Emma replied. 10 days ago I should have been on my honeymoon with James, and instead I'm here with you, feeling—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Feeling what?" Alexander prompted gently. "Alive," Emma decided. "More alive and more myself than I've felt in years." Alexander's expression softened. I know exactly what you mean. When Catherine died, I thought that part of me died too, the part capable of this kind of connection, until I found you sitting on those church steps. The vulnerability in his admission touched Emma deeply. We saved each other in a way. I think we did, Alexander agreed, raising his wine glass in a toast. To unexpected journeys. To unexpected journeys, Emma echoed, touching her glass to his. Their dinner was delicious, the conversation flowing easily between topics profound and mundane. Emma realized she had never laughed so much with James, had never felt this particular combination of comfort and excitement in his presence. As they were finishing dessert, Emma's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it reflexively, then froze. It was from James. I know you're still in the Hamptons with Reed. Please give me one chance to explain in person. I'm at the Harbor Hotel. Alexander, noticing her changed expression, asked quietly, James again? Emma nodded, showing him the message. He's persistent. I'll give him that. Do you want to see him? Alexander's tone was neutral, giving no indication of his preference. Emma considered the question honestly. Did some part of her still need closure from James? Was there anything he could say that would make a difference? No, she decided firmly. I said everything I needed to say at the farmer's market. Whatever explanation he wants to offer now is for his benefit, not mine. Alexander nodded, approval in his eyes. You don't owe him your time or attention. Exactly. Emma turned her phone face down on the table, a symbolic dismissal of James's attempt to re-enter her life. I'd rather focus on the present, on this lovely evening with you. They lingered over coffee, reluctant to end the night. When they finally left the restaurant, the town was quiet. Most shops closed for the evening. They decided to walk for a while, Emma slipping off her heels and carrying them as they strolled along the harbor, moonlight silvering the water. I've been meaning to ask you something, Emma said as they paused to look out at the boats gently rocking in their slips. That first day when you stopped your car, why did you offer to help me? Not just a ride or a sympathetic ear, but bringing me here, giving me space to heal. It was an extraordinary gesture to make to a stranger. Alexander was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. When I saw you sitting there in your wedding dress, the rain soaking through it, there was something in your expression that I recognized. A particular kind of devastation that I'd seen in my own mirror after Catherine died. He turned to face her, and I remembered how desperate I'd been for escape, for somewhere to lick my wounds away from pitying eyes. So I offered what I wished someone had offered me sooner. Simple human kindness, Emma murmured. With perhaps a touch of selfish motivation, Alexander admitted. Your presence has brought life back to this house in a way I never expected. They continued walking, their hands finding each other naturally. Emma marveled at how comfortable this felt, how right even as she acknowledged the whirlwind nature of their connection. Back at the beach house, they stood at the point where the path diverged, one direction leading to the main house, the other to the guest house. The moment was charged with possibility and restraint. Would you like to come in for a nightcap? Alexander asked, his voice low. Emma hesitated, desire warring with caution. I think, not tonight. We agreed to take things slowly, remember? Alexander nodded, lifting her hand to his lips. We did, and we will. The gesture was both respectful and intimate, acknowledging the attraction between them while honoring her boundaries. Good night, Alexander, Emma said softly. Good night, Emma. In the guest house, Emma changed into pajamas and sat on the edge of the bed, processing the emotions of the evening. There was no denying the depth of her feelings for Alexander, feelings that had developed with surprising speed yet felt more genuine than anything she'd experienced with James, even after years together. Yet she was also aware of the unusual circumstances, the heightened emotions, the vulnerability of her position. Taking things slowly was the right decision, giving them both time to ensure that what they felt was real and lasting. not merely a product of their unique situation. Emma fell asleep thinking about the future, not with anxiety as she had so often in recent months, but with a sense of anticipation. For the first time since James's devastating text, she found herself looking forward rather than back, curious and excited about what might come next. The following morning, Emma woke to a text from Sarah asking if they could meet for brunch in town. After confirming with Alexander that he had meetings to attend to anyway, Emma agreed, suggesting a cafe near the harbor. Sarah was already seated at an outdoor table when Emma arrived, looking chic in large sunglasses and a flowing summer dress. She stood to embrace Emma tightly. "Look at you," Sarah said, holding Emma at arm's length to study her. "You're glowing. The Hamptons air must agree with you." "Or the company," Emma replied with a small smile, taking a seat across from her friend. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "So something is happening with Mr. Billionaire. I knew it. Spill everything immediately." Over mimosas and avocado toast, Emma shared a carefully edited version of her time at the beach house, the conversations with Alexander, their growing connection, her plans to return to the city the following week. 2 weeks later, Emma stood at the window of the Reed Enterprises executive apartment, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. After much consideration, she had accepted Alexander's offer of temporary housing, recognizing the practical advantage it gave her in her apartment search. The space was luxurious, but not ostentatious, a well-appointed 2-bedroom on the Upper East Side, with sleek modern furnishings and impressive views. Her return to the city had been easier than anticipated. The media buzz around her jilted bride status had indeed faded quickly, as Alexander had predicted. A few gossip sites had noted her apartment viewings in the company of a Reed Enterprises HR representative, sparking speculation about her professional connection to Alexander, but the stories had been brief and relatively respectful. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Just landed. Dinner tonight?" Alexander had remained in the Hamptons for a few days after Emma's departure, giving her space to settle back into city life. They'd spoken daily, their connection maintaining its strength despite the physical distance. Now, he was back in Manhattan for a board meeting, and Emma felt a flutter of anticipation at seeing him again. "I'd love that," she replied. "My place or yours?" "How about neutral territory? Lucien's at 8? Emma smiled. Lucien's was an intimate French bistro in the West Village, known for its romantic atmosphere and excellent food. "Perfect. See you then." Setting her phone aside, Emma returned to the task that had occupied her morning, preparing for a job interview. After careful consideration, she had decided against applying directly to Reed Enterprises, despite Alexander's assurance that she would receive no special treatment. Their personal relationship was still too new, too precious to risk complicating with professional entanglements. Instead, she had applied to several tech-focused financial firms, including Horizon Innovations, a growing company specializing in funding healthcare technology startups. Their values aligned closely with her own evolving priorities, and the position, senior financial analyst with a focus on social impact assessment, seemed tailor-made for her skills and interests. The interview was scheduled for the following morning. Emma reviewed her notes one last time, then closed her laptop, satisfied with her preparation. She had time for a quick workout in the building's gym before getting ready for dinner with Alexander. Later, as Emma entered Lucien's, she spotted Alexander immediately, waiting at a corner table. He stood as she approached, his expression warming at the sight of her. He looked as handsome as ever in a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, though he'd removed his tie and unbuttoned his collar, giving him a more relaxed appearance. "You look beautiful," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Thank you," Emma replied, feeling a pleasant warmth spread through her at his proximity. She had chosen a deep green dress that complemented her eyes, paired with simple gold jewelry. "It's good to see you." They settled into their seats, falling easily into conversation as if they hadn't been apart. Alexander asked about her apartment search, listening attentively as she described the pros and cons of each place she'd viewed. The one in Chelsea has the best layout, Emma explained. But the Brooklyn apartment has amazing light and is closer to several tech hubs where I might be working. Speaking of work, Alexander said, how are you feeling about tomorrow's interview? Nervous but excited, Emma admitted. Horizon Innovations is doing impressive work, and the position seems like a perfect fit. They'd be lucky to have you, Alexander said with conviction. Although I still maintain that Reed Enterprises would benefit greatly from your expertise. Emma smiled. Maybe someday, but for now I think we both know it's better this way. Their dinner was delicious, the conversation flowing effortlessly between professional topics and more personal ones. Emma found herself studying Alexander across the candlelit table, marveling at how this man, who had been a stranger less than a month ago, now felt so essential to her life. What are you thinking? Alexander asked, noticing her contemplative expression. That I'm grateful, Emma replied honestly, for everything that's happened, even the painful parts. If James hadn't left me at the altar, I would never have met you. Alexander reached across the table, taking her hand. Sometimes life's worst moments lead us exactly where we need to be. After dinner, they walked through the village, the early autumn evening pleasant enough that they were in no hurry to say goodbye. When they reached Washington Square Park, they found a quiet bench away from the late-night crowd of students and musicians. I've been thinking, Alexander said, his fingers laced with Emma's, about us, about the future. Emma turned to face him, noting the seriousness in his expression. What about us? These past weeks have been extraordinary, he began. Our connection. It's unlike anything I've experienced since Catherine, maybe even before her. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But I'm also aware that you're just beginning to rebuild your life after a significant upheaval. I don't want to rush you or pressure you in any way. I appreciate that, Emma said softly. But I'm not as fragile as I might have been that first day on the church steps. What happened with James was painful, yes, but it also forced me to recognize patterns I'd been ignoring for years. I feel more clear-eyed now than I have in a long time. And what do those clear eyes tell you about us? Alexander asked. Emma considered the question, wanting to give him complete honesty. That what we have is real, that it's worth exploring, worth building on. She squeezed his hand. That I'm falling in love with you, as unexpected and perhaps impractical as that might seem. The vulnerability in her admission hung in the air between them. Alexander's expression softened, relief and joy replacing the caution that had been there moments before. I'm falling in love with you, too, he said, his voice low and certain. I think I started falling that first night, watching you sleep on my guest room bed, your wedding dress hanging in the bathroom. There was something so brave about you, even in your devastation. Emma laughed softly. I'm not sure brave is the word I'd use to describe myself that night. You were, Alexander insisted. You took a chance on a stranger because some part of you recognized it was what you needed. That takes courage. He leaned forward, cupping her face gently with his free hand. I want to do this right, Emma. I want to build something lasting with you, something that honors both our pasts while creating a new future together. I want that too, Emma whispered, her heart full. When he kissed her, it was different from their previous kisses, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. Emma leaned into it, allowing herself to embrace fully the feelings she'd been cautiously nurturing since their first meeting. They walked back to Emma's temporary apartment hand in hand, discussing practical matters, his upcoming business trip to Tokyo, her continuing apartment search, their plans for the weekend. At her door, Alexander kissed her again, then stepped back with visible restraint. I should go, he said, though his expression suggested he'd rather do the opposite. You could stay, Emma offered softly. Alexander studied her face. Are you sure? There's no rush. I'm sure, Emma replied, meeting his gaze steadily. We've been taking things slowly, and I appreciate that. But I know what I want, Alexander. I want you." The next morning, Emma woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar blinds and the weight of Alexander's arm around her waist. For a moment she lay still, savoring the warmth of his body against hers, the rhythm of his breathing, the sense of rightness she felt in his embrace. Carefully, so as not to wake him, she turned to study his sleeping face. In repose, he looked younger, the lines of responsibility smoothed away. Emma felt a surge of tenderness, followed by a moment of reflection on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. A month ago, she had woken up on what was supposed to be her wedding day, filled with anticipation for a future with James. Now she was waking up beside a different man, facing a future she couldn't have imagined then, one that felt more authentic, more aligned with her true self than the path she'd nearly taken. Alexander stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her watching him, a smile spread across his face. "Good morning," he murmured, drawing her closer. "Good morning," she replied, nestling into his embrace. "What time is your interview?" 10:30. "I have plenty of time." They lingered in bed for a while longer, talking softly about nothing in particular, simply enjoying the newfound intimacy between them. When Emma finally rose to shower and prepare for her interview, she felt a sense of calm confidence that had nothing to do with professional preparation and everything to do with the emotional foundation she'd been building. Alexander was dressed and making coffee when she emerged from the bedroom in her interview suit, a tailored navy ensemble that projected competence and quiet authority. "You look ready to conquer the financial world," he said, handing her a steaming mug. "That's the plan," Emma replied with a smile. As they stood together in the kitchen, Emma's phone buzzed with an email notification. She glanced at it, then stilled, her expression changing. "What is it?" Alexander asked, noting her reaction. "It's from James," Emma said, opening the email. The message was brief but surprisingly sincere. "Emma, I've accepted a position with our London office, effective immediately. I wanted you to know I'll be leaving New York tomorrow. I understand now that what happened between us, however painful, was for the best. You deserved more than I was able to give. I wish you happiness in whatever path you choose." James. Emma reread the message, searching for the conflicting emotions she might have expected. Regret, lingering hurt, even a touch of vindication. Instead, she felt only a gentle sense of closure, of a chapter ending cleanly. "He's moving to London," she told Alexander. "It seems he's found his own way forward." Alexander studied her face. "How do you feel about that?" Emma considered the question. "At peace," she said finally. "What we had is in the past, where it belongs. My future is here." She looked up at Alexander, loving the warmth she saw in his eyes. "With you, I hope?" "With me," Alexander confirmed, drawing her into his arms. "For as long as you want." As Emma left for her interview 20 minutes later, she paused on the sidewalk, taking in the energy of the city around her. New York felt different somehow, full of possibility rather than pressure, opportunity rather than obligation. She thought back to that rainy day on the church steps when it had seemed like her life was ending. Instead, it had been beginning anew. The path forward wouldn't always be smooth. Real life never was. But she was facing it with clear eyes and an open heart, no longer constrained by others' expectations or her own fears. With a smile, Emma hailed a taxi, ready to take the next step in her unexpected journey. Sometimes, she reflected as the car pulled away from the curb, the most beautiful destinations were the ones you never planned to visit. And sometimes, the most meaningful connections came when you least expected them, perhaps even on the worst day of your life, when a passing CEO stopped his car, looked into your eyes and said, "Come with me." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.